firing squad type situation. But at any rate, this arbitrary action, it might be said, it sort of prefigures modern America, in which wrongdoing is sort of subjective in the eyes of the beholder, and often a matter of fiction. At any rate, these hapless peasants are just about at the point of being killed by Don Montero for the classic reason of instilling a generalized fear of his power in the people. It's the old kind of technique used by loan sharks, and that is gangsters, that is kill one resistant citizen and you will intimidate 10,000. And so this is going to be a very public execution, and it's sort of tactical and meant to enhance the invincible power of Don Montero and his allies in the minds of the people. The people are, of course, poor and oppressed. Along the way, it might be said that Zorro takes on something of the character of a Robin Hood here, but it's a one-man Robin Hood operation. Well, in this particular opening up situation, very dangerous for the individuals involved, in comes in the Anthony Hopkins version of Zorro, and we see a good deal. We'll call him Zorro number 1, and we see a good deal of swordsmanship and flair. He operates with panache, a sort of Errol Flynn-esque swordsmanship, well choreographed, and so forth. And of course, he thwarts swarms of Don Montero's men in the process. The sinister blonde has not appeared on the scene yet. Now, this event has taken place, and it just so happens, however, that Zorro, the Anthony Hopkins number 1 Zorro, has just a little piece of a problem which he's helped out in by a couple of lads, 10 or 12 years old. He's kind of grateful. He gives one of them a medallion. Then he carries on with his Zorro act and so forth, thwarts Don Montero, saves the helpless peasants and so forth. Much cheering from the people, the oppressed people, even the local priest, hooray-ing Zorro and so forth. Well, this really is not too much of a vote for Don Montero, either as a popular figure or in terms of his desire to project an image of invincible power. So something will have to be done about this Zorro. And as a matter of fact, Don Montero happens to have a pretty good notion just who this Zorro might be. Now, early in this film, we also get an example of Anthony Hopkins as a father. We see a domestic scene. He has a lovely wife, a little daughter, a little baby girl, and we get a look at him here, and he seems to be something of adulting sort of father, trying to impart wisdom via stories and so forth to a little baby girl there. Well, it just so happens that Don Montero also has eyes for this particular woman who married Don Diego de la Varga, Anthony Hopkins, and this also is an angle, but at any rate, Montero, sends his men to the abode of Don Diego de la Varga and arrest de la Varga as Zorro, or probably Zorro, or at any rate arbitrarily puts him to arrest. Now, in the process, the wife of Anthony Hopkins intercedes and gets a bullet and dies, this makes Anthony Hopkins very sad. It makes the Don Montero very sad, unhappy too, because he basically had plans to have this woman as his wife, get rid of De La Varga. Well, he does, at any rate, get rid of Don De La Varga. He puts him in a prison that is as foul as any you can imagine. Challenged the bravest man, his instincts for survival. And it makes you wonder, you know, actually, if you go back to the Bible, to the laws handed down by the Almighty to Moses, there was no imprisonment. One was put to death for serious offenses in matters of money or debt or something of this sort. One made restitution, perhaps even being indentured for a period if needed to pay back the injured party. But there were no prisons and no imprisonments that I recall, other than that in the sense of an indentured person. So I think this is actually a devolution, this idea of imprisonment, which comes to us through the fine minds of our friends in Freemasonry and the mystery religions, as a opposition to that of the good Lord Almighty. But at any rate, this is a terrible prison that Anthony Hopkins finds himself in. The daughter, the little daughter, well, Don Montero takes the little daughter, a daughter that he believes should be his anyway, and rears the child as his own, telling her, leading her to believe that he's the natural father and that her mother died in childbirth. So she grows up to be within the tent of Don Montero, and hence privileged. But the film then projects about 15 years. We see then the Antonio Banderas character. He and his brother, who are the grown-up versions of the two lads we saw at the outset who gave a little helping hand to Anthony Hopkins, Zorro #1. They are now adult and making their living by means of robbery and as con men. Of course, Zorro is something of a con man, actually, but the lifestyle it seems to be a little bit one of danger and scantness, feast or famine at any rate. But they're pretty slick, and they have some Confederates and so forth. Now, it is at this time that the sinister U.S. officer appears on the scene. There is a conflict between the brothers and the Confederates and this officer and his men, and Antonio Banderas, his brother, is killed. Banderas escapes Murrieta after first taking the medallion from his dying brother and vamoosing. Well, he's kind of bummed out about this. It's kind of hard to get quite over this in his mind. He heads for a remote cantina. It just so happens about this time that Anthony Hopkins, Zorro #1, is released for reasons kind of obscure to me from this awful prison dungeon, whatever one would call it, just a dreadful place. He seems to have gotten out pretty much altogether. You know, he is together, I'll put it that way. It seems hardly changed, a little more white fur, but otherwise pretty much the same old Anthony Hopkins, Don De La Varga. He goes back toward his abode. Along the way, he stops at the cantina where Alejandro Murrieta Banderas is drowning his sorrows. It's kind of a bleak-looking place itself, hardly more than a sear shack where they're selling some booze. But at any rate, they get into a little conflict, and Anthony Hopkins shows Antonio Banderas, who is number one here, and along the way notices the medallion that he's wearing, recognizes it as the medallion that he used to have, and asks him about it and finds out a little bit about what has happened. He offers to help the boy, the young man, to take him under the wings, tells him basically the old Kennedy-esque stuff about don't get angry, get even, and so he is going to sort of groom this guy to that mission. The guy is sees the light and is very anxious to learn. So they go back to the old Don de la Varga abode. It's been burnt down by Don Montero many years past, but still a solid structure and can be repaired, which they move into, and Anthony Hopkins begins to school Antonio Banderas, Murrieta, in the arts of swordsmanship, etc. It also requires him getting in shape. It recalls a little bit the tutoring of the good brother, so to speak, in the man in the Iron Mask, the brother in the Iron Mask who released and being trained to become a king had to also learn these sorts of things. Well, it just so happens that there is an opportunity, after sufficient skills have been mastered, to go out and pretend to be Zorro, number 2, and Murrieta does exactly that. He has a great time. He's a pretty cocky guy, handy with a sword now, fairly athletic, and so forth. So along the way he meets this very pretty, shapely woman. It turns out to be the natural child of Anthony Hopkins' character, the assumed daughter of Don Montero. They have even a little spark pass there. Everyone in the audience knows something's going to develop here. Well, off he goes, and he practices a little bit of his Zorro stuff, helping the poor and whatnot, thwarting the Dons, the evil Dons. Now, the Dons are right now in full push to declare a good whack of California and adjacent turf a new republic under their thumb, of course. And they're going to do this with the gold Don Montero has discovered, and he's looped the other Dons into the deal and so forth, and now it's up to Anthony Hopkins to and Antonio Banderas to thwart this. They decide, or I'll put it this way, Anthony Hopkins' character decides that he will spring his fellow, his new Zorro on Don Montero at a ball that Don Montero is having. It's a kind of a Pygmalion type of scene in which the character Banderas is made out to be an Iberian aristocrat who is here to check either on his land holdings and or to invest in other properties and so forth. And Anthony Hopkins is there kind of serving as a valet advisor, gopher. So they do go to the ball, and it turns out Banderas is able to pass himself off as this Iberian aristocrat. He is a smash hit with all the Dons, and they're completely conned by him. He has a dance with the daughter, a rather hot dance at that, raises eyebrows. It's justified on the basis that this is all the rage at the Iberian court, the king. The king of Spain. We have this little thing going in which there is a Lois Lane Superman element here, because as Lois Lane was attracted to Superman and felt a little bit turned off by the feckless Clark Kent, so the daughter of Don Montero, the natural daughter of Don Diego de la Varga, sees the aristocratic version of Banderas as exquisitely mannered and a little bit weak, and yet she is very drawn to this Zorro man. He's very macho and stuff like that. So these things are so often subjective, aren't they? At any rate, he has made a double conquest. He has basically conquered the heart of the daughter of Don Montero, and he has also fooled or conned Don Montero and the Dons in regard to who he is. So he's sort of welcomed into the group or accepted. This gives Anthony Hopkins also a chance to come back in surreptitiously into the place that he was well familiar with some 15 to 16 years back before being thrown in prison, and to have the kind of a satisfaction of basically being something of a Trojan horse, or having constructed a Trojan horse in Zorro 2, the Iberian aristocrat slash. So these things continue on, and the Zorro act and whatnot, the plotting. It just so happens that the daughter of Don Montero, out in the supermarket, the marketplace, encounters an older woman who is selling goods, produce, who notices her and tells her that, or calls her by the name Senorita de la Varga, or something like this. And she corrects the woman, and then there is a revelation here about her parentage, and she's quite taken aback. She goes from being the daughter, the proud and willful daughter of the tyrant Don Montero, to the daughter of the oppressed Don Diego de la Varga, who is, I would say, after he was thrown into prison, something of a symbol of the entirety of the oppressed peoples of California, and hence she is sort of transformed. She seems to have some feeling for the people at any rate, but she seems to be one who fairly quickly transforms her feelings toward that of Don de la Varga and the people, as well, of course, as with Zorro, the champion of the people. So there you have it. Now, all along here, we've also had this sinister blonde officer who may or may not have eyes for the daughter of Don Montero himself. However, he is sort of the overseer of a gold mine operation that basically seems to call to mind the building of the pyramids. It seems to have required a lot of sort of slave labor almost, prison labor perhaps. This anticipates modern American prison work perhaps. But at any rate, there is an increasing conflict between him and Zorro 2, because of course Zorro 2 recognizes him as the person who killed his brother, and plus there is the perhaps sense of competition for the daughter of Don Montero, the natural daughter of Don Diego de la Varga. So these things are all coming to a head. In fact, they do come to a head, and there's a great double fight that takes place over in the gold mine, and we have an extended fight between the officer and Zorro 2 and Zorro 1 and Don Montero and so forth. And it all resolves itself in favor of the good guys, except that Anthony Hopkins is killed, and he has the satisfaction of giving his daughter, who now recognizes him as her real father, to Banderas, his character Marietta, Zorro number 2. So there's this sense of continuation. The designs of the tyrant dons are thwarted, at least for the time. The concept of republicanism is still alive, having been put on the scene by Don Montero himself for ulterior reasons. We have a kind of an epilogue to this film, in which we have a domestic scene of Alejandro Murrieta and his new wife, the natural daughter of Don Diego de la Varga, and they have a little baby child, and we see Banderas kind of doting over the child and telling a little story out of it that recapitulates the scene that we saw at the outset between Anthony Hopkins and his wife.